Who knew a bowling game would lead to a mother-in-law twist like this? It all started on a cool Friday evening. My wife Lisa and I had planned a casual night out with her mother Grace. Bowling wasn't my favorite activity, but it made Lisa happy, and I liked seeing her smile. Grace, on the other hand, had always been a bit of an enigma to me. She was a striking woman full of confidence and charm, traits she had passed on to her daughter. But there was something else about Grace, something alluring and forbidden, that I couldn't quite put my finger on. As we entered the bowling alley, the familiar scent of waxed lanes and fried food filled the air. We grabbed our shoes and headed to our assigned lane. Lisa was excited, her laughter echoing through the hall as she picked up a bright pink ball. Grace followed suit, her movements graceful and fluid. I couldn't help but notice how her jeans hugged her curves, accentuating her figure in a way that seemed almost intentional. We began our game, and the night progressed with the usual playful banter and friendly competition. I was determined to show off a bit, hoping to impress both Lisa and Grace with my bowling skills. But it seemed Grace was just as competitive, if not more so. Each time she scored a strike, she'd flash a triumphant smile, her eyes locking with mine for a brief, electric moment. Halfway through the game, Lisa excused herself to take a phone call from work, leaving Grace and me alone. The atmosphere shifted subtly, a tension settling between us that was both exhilarating and unnerving. "You've got a good form," Grace remarked, her eyes twinkling mischievously. "Thanks, Grace. You're not too bad yourself," I replied, trying to keep my tone light despite the flutter in my chest. We continued to bowl, and with each passing frame, our conversation grew more personal. Grace shared stories about her youth, her dreams, and even her regrets. There was a vulnerability in her words that made her seem less like Lisa's mother and more like a woman with her own desires and fears. "You know, you remind me a lot of myself when I was younger," she said softly, her gaze lingering on my face. "Full of ambition and energy." I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. The way she looked at me, it was as if she could see right through me, stripping away all pretenses. When Lisa finally returned, the spell was broken, but the memory of that intense connection remained, seared into my mind. As the night drew to a close, we said our goodbyes, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between Grace and me. Back home, Lisa fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the evening's activities. I, on the other hand, lay awake, replaying the night's events in my mind. Every glance, every touch seemed to take on a new, deeper meaning. My thoughts kept drifting back to Grace, the way her lips curved into a knowing smile, the softness in her eyes, the warmth of her presence. Days turned into weeks and life continued its usual rhythm. But every time we visited Grace or she came over for dinner, I felt that same magnetic pull. It was like a dance, each of us taking tentative steps, testing boundaries, exploring unspoken desires. One evening, Lisa mentioned that she would be traveling for a work conference for a few days. The thought of being alone with Grace, even briefly, sent a thrill of anticipation through me. I wondered if she felt it too, this unspoken tension that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. The night before Lisa's trip, we had dinner at Grace's place. The meal was delicious, the conversation light and enjoyable. But beneath the surface, I sensed a current of anticipation, a silent understanding that something was about to change. As Lisa and I prepared to leave, Grace pulled me aside, her eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "Take care of Lisa while she's gone," she said softly, her voice tinged with something I couldn't quite decipher. "Of course," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. We shared a lingering look, a silent acknowledgement of the growing connection between us. It was a moment suspended in time, filled with possibility and danger. That night, as I lay in bed next to Lisa, my mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I loved my wife, but the attraction I felt for Grace was undeniable. It was as if I were standing on the edge of a precipice, teetering between loyalty and desire. The next morning, I drove Lisa to the airport, our goodbye kiss lingering longer than usual. As I watched her walk away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to cross a line, one that would change everything. With Lisa gone, the house felt emptier, quieter. I busied myself with work, trying to ignore the growing anticipation. But as the hours ticked by, my thoughts kept drifting back to Grace. I wondered if she was thinking about me too, if she felt the same restless longing. That evening, I received a text from Grace, asking if I'd like to come over for dinner. My heart skipped a beat as I typed out my reply, the excitement and apprehension warring within me. Yes, I'd love to, I wrote, my fingers trembling slightly. As I made my way to Grace's house, I knew that this night would be different. The boundaries we had danced around for so long were about to be tested, and there was no turning back. When I arrived at Grace's house, my heart was pounding. She greeted me at the door, her smile warm and inviting. She was dressed in a simple yet elegant dress that hugged her figure perfectly, a stark contrast to the casual outfits she usually wore. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let me pass. "Dinner's almost ready." The aroma of a home-cooked meal filled the air, but it was the sight of Grace that held my attention. She moved with a grace and confidence that captivated me, and as she led me to the dining room, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The table was set beautifully, with candles casting a soft, romantic glow. We sat across from each other, and as we began to eat, our conversation flowed easily, just like it always did. But tonight, there was an underlying tension, a charged energy that neither of us acknowledged but both felt deeply. After dinner, we moved to the living room, each carrying a glass of wine. Grace sat on the couch, and I took a seat beside her, the distance between us shrinking with each passing moment. "Thank you for coming over," she said, her voice soft. "I've been looking forward to tonight." "Me too," I replied, my heart racing. There was so much I wanted to say, but I didn't know where to start. The connection between us felt stronger than ever, a palpable force that drew us together. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our unspoken feelings hanging in the air. Finally, Grace turned to face me, her eyes searching mine. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been feeling a connection between us, something more than just friendship." I felt a surge of relief and excitement. "I feel it too," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Grace reached out, her hand resting on mine. The touch was electric, sending a shiver down my spine. "I know this is complicated," she said, her eyes filled with uncertainty, "but I can't ignore how I feel about you." I took a deep breath, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I can't ignore it either, Grace. There's something between us, something I've never felt before." Our gazes locked, and in that moment all the barriers we had carefully maintained crumbled. I leaned in, my lips brushing hers tentatively, testing the waters. She responded immediately, her kiss gentle yet filled with longing. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, more desperate. I could feel the heat of her body against mine, the softness of her lips, the way her hands tangled in my hair. It was as if all the pent-up desire we had been suppressing had finally found its release. We broke apart, both of us breathing heavily. Grace's eyes were dark with desire, her lips slightly swollen from our kiss. "I've wanted this for so long," she whispered, her voice husky with emotion. "Me too," I replied, my hand cupping her cheek, "but we have to be careful. We can't hurt Lisa." Grace nodded, her expression somber. "I know, this is complicated, but I don't want to let go of what we have." "Neither do I said, my thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "We just need to be cautious, make sure we don't do anything rash," she smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Then let's take this one step at a time." We spent the rest of the evening talking, our conversation a mix of lighthearted banter and serious discussions about the future. We knew we were treading dangerous waters, but the connection we shared was too strong to ignore. As the night drew to a close, I reluctantly got up to leave. Grace walked me to the door, her hand lingering in mine. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly. "It meant a lot to me." "Thank you," I replied, my heart full. "For everything." We shared one last lingering kiss before I stepped out into the cool night air. As I drove home, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I knew we were playing with fire, but the memory of Grace's touch, her kiss, was enough to fuel my desire for more. The days that followed were filled with stolen glances, secret texts, and brief clandestine meetings. Every moment we spent together was a risk, but it was a risk we were both willing to take. The thrill of our affair, the forbidden nature of our relationship only heightened the intensity of our connection. One evening, Grace invited me over again. This time, there was no pretense of a casual dinner. The moment I walked through the door, we were in each other's arms, our kisses hungry and demanding. "I've missed you," she murmured against my lips, her hands roaming my back. "I've missed you too," I replied, my voice hoarse with longing. We made our way to the bedroom, our movements urgent, driven by the need to be together. The passion that had simmered between us for so long finally erupted, and we lost ourselves in each other, the outside world forgotten. As we lay together afterward, our bodies entwined, I knew that our affair was more than just a fleeting attraction. It was a deep, undeniable connection that neither of us could ignore. But with that connection came a new set of challenges, a reality we would soon have to face. The days that followed were a blur of intense emotions and secret meetings. Every time I saw Grace, the connection between us grew stronger, deeper. But with that connection came a mounting sense of anxiety and guilt. We were walking a tightrope, trying to balance our desire for each other with the need to protect Lisa from the truth. One evening, Grace and I decided to meet at a secluded park on the outskirts of town. It was a warm summer night, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the distant hum of crickets. We found a quiet spot by a small pond, hidden from view by a cluster of trees. As we sat on a blanket, our fingers entwined, I couldn't help but marvel at how surreal this all felt. Just a few months ago, I never would have imagined finding myself in this situation, having an affair with my mother-in-law. But now, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Grace leaned her head on my shoulder, her breath warm against my neck. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I sighed, tightening my grip on her hand. "All the time. I think about what it would be like if things were different, if we could be together without all this secrecy. But we can't," she said, her tone somber. "We can't hurt Lisa. She deserves better than that." "I know," I replied, my heart heavy with the weight of our situation. "But I can't help how I feel about you." "I feel the same way," Grace admitted, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "But we need to be realistic. This can't go on forever." I knew she was right. Our affair was like a ticking time bomb, and sooner or later it would explode, leaving devastation in its wake. But the thought of ending things with Grace was unbearable. "I don't want to lose you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't want to lose you either," she replied, her lips brushing mine in a tender kiss. "But we need to be careful for Lisa's sake." We sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. The reality of our situation hung heavy over us, a constant reminder of the precarious path we were treading. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, we reluctantly got up to leave. Grace's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of longing and resignation. "Promise me we'll figure this out," she said, her voice wavering. "I don't want to lose what we have." "I promise," I replied, pulling her into a tight embrace. "We'll find a way." But as I drove home that night, my mind was filled with doubts. How could we possibly navigate this without causing pain and heartbreak? The future seemed uncertain, and the weight of our secret threatened to crush me. Over the next few weeks, our secret meetings continued, each one more intense and passionate than the last. The thrill of our forbidden romance was intoxicating, but the guilt was ever present, a constant reminder of the betrayal we were committing. One evening, as I sat alone in my living room, my phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "I need to see you," it read. "Can you come over?" My heart raced as I quickly typed out my reply. "On my way." When I arrived at Grace's house, she greeted me at the door, her expression troubled. She led me inside and we sat on the couch, the tension between us palpable. "What's wrong?" I asked, my concern growing. "Lisa called me today," Grace said, her voice trembling. "She's been feeling distant, like there's something I'm not telling her. She's starting to suspect something." A cold dread settled over me. The last thing I wanted was for Lisa to be hurt, and the thought of her finding out about our affair was terrifying. "What did you say?" I asked, my mind racing. "I tried to reassure her, but I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," Grace admitted, her eyes filled with worry. "I hate lying to her." "I do too," I said, running a hand through my hair in frustration. "But what choice do we have? We can't let her find out." "We need to be more careful," Grace said, her voice firm. "We can't let our guard down, not for a second." "I know," I agreed, the weight of our situation pressing down on me. "But what if she finds out anyway? What then?" Grace's eyes met mine, and I could see the fear and uncertainty mirrored in her gaze. "Then we deal with it, together." Her words gave me a small measure of comfort, but the reality of our situation was inescapable. We were playing a dangerous game, and the stakes were higher than ever. As I drove home that night, my mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I loved Lisa, but my feelings for Grace were undeniable. The thought of losing either of them was unbearable, but the longer our affair continued, the more inevitable that outcome seemed. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and stolen moments with Grace. Every text, every glance felt like a risk, and the tension was becoming almost too much to bear. One evening, Grace and I met at a quiet coffee shop, hoping to talk things through away from prying eyes. As we sat in a secluded corner, our hands intertwined, I could see the worry etched on her face. "We need to make a decision," she said, her voice filled with resolve. "We can't keep living like this. It's not fair to anyone." "I know," I replied, my heart heavy. "But what choice do we have?" Grace took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with a steely determination. "We need to end this, for Lisa's sake, and for ours." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The thought of ending things with Grace was unbearable, but I knew she was right. Our affair was a ticking time bomb, and it was only a matter of time before it exploded. "I don't want to lose you," I said, my voice breaking. "And I don't want to lose you either," Grace replied, her eyes filled with tears. "But we need to do what's right, for all of us." As we sat there, holding each other's hands, the reality of our situation hit me with full force. We had been living in a fantasy, but it was time to face the truth. With a heavy heart, we made the painful decision to end our affair. The next few days were a blur of heartbreak and regret, but we both knew it was the right thing to do. As I sat alone in my living room, the weight of our decision pressing down on me, I couldn't help but wonder what the future held. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. The connection between Grace and me was something I would never forget. The decision to end our affair was meant to bring clarity and peace, but it only seemed to amplify the emotions we felt. Every time I saw Grace, whether at family gatherings or casual visits, the magnetic pull between us was stronger than ever. The decision hung over us like a dark cloud, yet it failed to dim the fire that burned in our hearts. A week after our painful resolution, Lisa suggested we all go out for dinner to celebrate Grace's birthday. I agreed, masking the turmoil inside me with a smile. The restaurant was a cozy, intimate place, with dim lighting and soft music that did little to calm my nerves. We sat at a corner table, the three of us laughing and chatting as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Each glance, each brush of our hands, held an unspoken depth of longing and regret. Lisa, blissfully unaware, was radiant. Her laughter, a sweet sound that pierced my heart with guilt. After dinner, Lisa suggested we continue the celebration at home with some wine. Back at Grace's house, we settled into the living room, the conversation flowing easily. As the night wore on, Lisa excused herself to go to bed early, leaving Grace and me alone once more. The silence that followed her departure was charged with unspoken words. Grace poured us another glass of wine, her hands trembling slightly. She sat beside me on the couch, closer than was probably wise, and the familiar tension crackled in the air between us. "This is harder than I thought it would be," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," I replied, my hand reaching out to gently touch hers. "I miss you every second we're apart." Her eyes met mine, filled with the same longing and confusion that mirrored my own. "Maybe we shouldn't have ended things so abruptly," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't stop thinking about you." My heart raced as her words sank in. The decision to end our affair had been made with the best of intentions, but it had only intensified our feelings for each other. "Grace," I began, my voice hoarse with emotion, "I don't think I can stay away from you." The admission hung in the air, heavy with meaning. In that moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the two of us, bound by a connection that defied reason and logic. Before I knew it, we were in each other's arms, our kisses frantic and desperate. The couch seemed to dissolve beneath us as we gave into the passion we had tried so hard to suppress. Her hands roamed my body, and mine hers, each touch igniting a fire that threatened to consume us both. "We can't keep doing this," Grace gasped between kisses, her voice a mix of desire and desperation. "But I need you right now." "I need you too," I replied, my lips trailing down her neck, savoring the taste of her skin. "Just this once more." We moved to the bedroom, shedding our clothes along the way, our desire for each other overpowering any sense of restraint. As we came together, it was with a fervor born of months of longing and frustration. The world outside ceased to exist, and in that moment, there was only us. Our bodies moved in perfect harmony, each touch, each kiss, a testament to the depth of our connection. It was a dance of passion and love, a moment of pure, unbridled ecstasy that neither of us wanted to end. As we lay tangled in the sheets afterward, our breathing heavy and our bodies spent, reality slowly began to seep back in. The weight of what we had done settled over us, but it couldn't erase the joy and contentment we felt in each other's arms. "I don't want to lose this," I murmured, my hand gently stroking her hair. "I don't want to lose you." Grace sighed, her fingers tracing circles on my chest. "I don't either, but we can't keep living like this, sneaking around, lying to Lisa." "I know," I said, my heart aching at the thought of the inevitable choices we would have to make. "But I don't know how to let you go." She lifted her head, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Maybe we don't have to," she said softly. "Maybe we can find a way to make this work without hurting Lisa." "How?" I asked, my mind racing with possibilities and doubts. "We take it slow, figure things out as we go," she suggested, her voice filled with hope. "Maybe there's a way for us to be together without destroying everything else." It was a fragile hope, but in that moment, it was all we had. We fell asleep in each other's arms, the promise of a future together hanging in the air like a delicate thread. The next morning, we awoke to the harsh light of day and the reality of our situation. I kissed Grace one last time before leaving, my heart heavy with the knowledge that our journey was far from over. We were on a path fraught with danger and uncertainty, but we were determined to find a way to be together, no matter the cost. As I drove home, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The night had been a bittersweet reminder of what we shared and what we stood to lose. But it had also given me hope, a fragile, tenuous hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to navigate the treacherous waters of our affair and come out on the other side together. Our secret meetings continued, each one more intense and passionate than the last. We were playing a dangerous game, but the connection between us was too strong to deny. Every touch, every kiss, was a reaffirmation of the bond we shared, a bond that neither of us was willing to break. The days turned into weeks, and the tension between us and the rest of the world grew. We knew we were living on borrowed time, but the moments we stole together were worth the risk. One evening, as we lay in each other's arms after another clandestine meeting, Grace turned to me, her eyes filled with a steely determination. "We need to make a decision," she said, her voice firm. "We can't keep living like this forever." "I know," I replied, my heart heavy with the weight of our situation. "But what do we do?" "We tell Lisa the truth," she said, her voice unwavering. "We owe it to her, and to ourselves." The thought of coming clean to Lisa filled me with dread, but I knew Grace was right. We couldn't keep living a lie, and the longer we waited, the more it would hurt everyone involved. As I looked into Grace's eyes, I saw the strength and resolve that had drawn me to her in the first place. We were in this together, and whatever the future held, we would face it side by side. With a heavy heart and a sense of determination, we began to plan how to break the news to Lisa. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. We couldn't keep living in the shadows. It was time to step into the light and face the consequences of our actions, no matter what they might be. The decision to come clean weighed heavily on both of us. Grace and I spent countless hours discussing how best to approach Lisa, how to minimize the inevitable pain and fallout. Our secret meetings, once filled with passion and stolen moments of joy, now carried a somber undertone as we prepared for the storm that was sure to come. One evening, after yet another clandestine meeting filled with both love and dread, we decided that the time had come. Grace would invite Lisa over for a casual dinner, and we would tell her the truth together. It was the hardest decision we had ever made, but we knew it was the right thing to do. The night arrived all too quickly. As I drove to Grace's house, my heart pounded in my chest, each beat a reminder of the impending confrontation. When I arrived, Grace greeted me with a tight, anxious smile. She was dressed simply, her usual elegance tinged with an air of apprehension. We embraced briefly, drawing strength from each other before Lisa arrived. The dinner started uneventfully, with Lisa chatting animatedly about her day. Grace and I exchanged nervous glances, trying to keep our composure. As we moved to the living room for coffee, the weight of what we were about to do settled over us like a heavy fog. "Lisa, there's something we need to talk about," Grace began, her voice trembling slightly. Lisa looked at us, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What is it? You both look so serious." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Lisa, there's no easy way to say this, but you deserve to know the truth." Her eyes widened in alarm and she looked back and forth between us. "What's going on?" "You're scaring me." Grace reached out and took Lisa's hand, her own shaking slightly. "Lisa, we have been involved in something that we deeply regret. It's been weighing on us and we can't keep it from you any longer." Lisa's eyes filled with confusion and fear. "What are you talking about?" I swallowed hard, my voice barely above a whisper. "Lisa, Grace and we've been having an affair." The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa's face went pale and for a moment it seemed as if she hadn't heard us. Then her eyes filled with tears and she pulled her hand away from Grace's. "What?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "How could you? How could you do this to me?" The pain in her voice was like a knife to my heart. "Lisa, I'm so sorry. We never meant for this to happen. It just did." Grace reached out, tears streaming down her face. "Lisa, please understand. We never wanted to hurt you. We love you so much, but it's been tearing us apart." Lisa stood up abruptly, her eyes flashing with anger and betrayal. "Love? You call this love? You've both been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back. How long has this been going on?" I looked down, unable to meet her gaze. "A few months," I admitted, my voice choked with guilt. "A few months," she repeated, her voice rising. "And you thought you could just, what, confess, and everything would be okay?" "Lisa, we're so sorry," Grace said, her voice pleading. "We never wanted this to happen. We've been trying to figure out what to do, how to tell you, but you deserve to know the truth." Tears streamed down Lisa's face as she looked at us, her expression a mix of hurt, anger, and disbelief. "I can't believe this. I trusted you both. I loved you both." "We love you too, Lisa," I said, my voice breaking. "More than anything, this was a mistake, a terrible mistake. But our feelings for you have never changed." "How can you say that?" she cried, her voice shaking with emotion. "You betrayed me in the worst possible way." The room fell silent as Lisa's words hung in the air. Grace and I could do nothing but watch as the woman we both loved grappled with the enormity of our betrayal. After what felt like an eternity, Lisa took a deep breath, her tears slowing. "I need time," she said quietly, her voice raw. "I need to think. I can't deal with this right now." "Of course," Grace said, her voice trembling. "Take all the time you need. We're here for you no matter what." Lisa nodded, her eyes filled with pain. "I need to go," she said, standing up. "I can't be here right now." As she walked out the door, the sound of it closing behind her was like a final, crushing blow. Grace and I sat in silence, the weight of our actions settling over us like a dark cloud. "We've hurt her so much," Grace said, her voice filled with anguish. "I know," I replied, my heart heavy with guilt and sorrow. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt her." We sat together, holding each other, the enormity of what we had done sinking in. Our love had brought us joy, but it had also brought unimaginable pain. We had shattered Lisa's trust, and now we could only hope that time would heal the wounds we had inflicted. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty and regret. Lisa stayed with a friend, needing space and time to process everything. Grace and I continued to see each other, but the joy of our love was overshadowed by the guilt and sorrow we felt. One evening, as we sat together in Grace's living room, she looked at me, her eyes filled with determination. "We need to give Lisa the space she needs," she said, "and we need to figure out what we want. This can't go on like this." "I know," I replied, my heart heavy, "but I don't know what to do. I don't want to lose you, but I don't want to hurt Lisa any more than we already have." Grace sighed, her hand resting on mine. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. "But for now, let's take it one day at a time." As we sat together, holding each other close, I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. We had made mistakes, and we would have to live with the consequences. But in that moment, we had each other, and that was enough. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. We couldn't keep living in the shadows. It was time to face the consequences of our actions and find a way forward, whatever that might be. The days that followed were some of the hardest I had ever experienced. Lisa remained with her friend, and the silence between us was deafening. Grace and I continued to meet, but the joy of our time together was tainted by the constant reminder of the pain we had caused. One afternoon, about a week after our confession, Lisa called. Hearing her voice on the other end of the line brought a flood of emotions: relief, fear, hope. She asked if we could meet at a park to talk. I agreed immediately, my heart pounding with anticipation and dread. When I arrived at the park, Lisa was sitting on a bench by the lake. She looked tired, her eyes red from crying, but there was a strength in her gaze that hadn't been there before. I approached cautiously, unsure of what to say or do. "Hi," I said softly, sitting down beside her. "Hi," she replied, her voice flat. For a few moments, we sat in silence, watching the ducks glide across the water. Finally, Lisa spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "I've had a lot of time to think," she began, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "And I still can't believe this happened. You and my mom, it's like a nightmare I can't wake up from." "I know," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Lisa. I never wanted to hurt you." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "I believe you, but that doesn't change what happened. You both betrayed me in the worst possible way." "I know," I repeated, my heart aching. "And I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Lisa turned to face me, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "I need to know why," she said. "Why did you do it?" The question hung in the air, and I struggled to find the right words. "I wish I had a clear answer," I said finally. "It started with innocent conversations, shared moments. And before we knew it, it became something more. It wasn't planned, it just happened." Lisa looked down, her fingers twisting a piece of grass. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," she said softly, "but I need to try. For my own sake." "I understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." She nodded, her eyes meeting mine. "I need time and space, but I'm willing to try to work through this. I don't know what the future holds, but I want to at least try to heal." "Thank you," I said, my heart filled with a glimmer of hope. "I promise I'll give you all the time and space you need." We sat together for a while longer, the silence between us filled with a sense of fragile understanding. When we finally parted, it was with the knowledge that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but at least there was a road. Grace and I met later that evening, our conversation heavy with the weight of Lisa's words. We knew that our relationship would never be the same, but we also knew that we couldn't go back to what we had before. "We need to take a break," Grace said softly, her eyes filled with sorrow. "For Lisa's sake and for ours. We need to focus on healing the wounds we've caused." "I agree," I replied, my heart heavy with the thought of losing her. "But I don't want to lose you completely." "You won't," she said, taking my hand in hers. "We'll find a way to stay connected, even if it's not the way we want. But for now, we need to do what's right." We shared a long, tender embrace, knowing that it might be our last for a while. As I left her house that night, I felt a mix of sorrow and resolve. We had made mistakes, but we were committed to making things right, no matter how difficult it might be. The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment and introspection. Lisa and I attended couples counseling, working through the pain and betrayal together. It was a slow, painful process, but with each session we began to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Grace and I kept our distance, communicating only when necessary and focusing on our own healing. It was hard, but it was the right thing to do. Slowly the wounds began to heal, and a sense of normalcy started to return. Months passed, and while the pain of our actions never fully disappeared, it began to fade into the background. Lisa and I found a new rhythm, one built on honesty and understanding. Our relationship was different, but it was stronger in some ways, forged in the fire of our shared experience. Grace and I remained close, but our relationship evolved into something more appropriate. We became friends, confidants, supporting each other from a distance. The love we had shared was still there, but it had transformed into a deep, abiding respect and affection. One day, as Lisa and I walked hand in hand through the park, I felt a sense of peace. We had been through so much, but we had come out the other side stronger and more resilient. "I'm glad we're here," Lisa said, her voice soft. "I never thought we'd make it, but we did." "Me too," I replied, squeezing her hand. "I'm so grateful for you, for us." As we continued our walk, I felt a sense of hope for the future. The journey had been painful and difficult, but it had also brought us closer together. We had faced our demons and come out the other side stronger, more connected, and more in love than ever before. The end of our affair had been the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with challenges and growth. It wasn't the path we had expected, but it was the one we had chosen, and it was leading us toward a brighter, more hopeful future.